Bruce Millsap, 8 murder convictions, 8 death sentences. A Southern California case built on robbery, retaliation, and witnesses who became targets. 8 murder convictions, 8 death sentences. Bruce Millsap was not sentenced like a regular killer. The court file says robbery, witnesses, fear, and retaliation, all stacked into one of the heaviest murder cases Los Angeles ever put on paper. When the jury finished, the number was simple: death 8 times. This story starts with money, but it does not stay there. The kind of robbery case prosecutors describe leaves loose ends everywhere. People who saw too much, people who heard names, people who knew who got paid, and people somebody might want quiet before trial. Bruce Millsap came out of the Southern California street world, with public accounts tying him to Carson Crip circles. But the street label is not what made the case infamous. The verdict did. 8 first-degree murder convictions with special circumstances. That is the number that turned his name into a death row file. Southern California made the case harder to read from the outside. Freeways connect cities fast. Money moves fast. Rumors move faster. A robbery in one place can connect to a witness somewhere else. And by the time police understand the pattern, bodies are already part of the record. Robbery is not just a charge in this story, it is the engine. Cash routes, routine stops, getaway plans, scared witnesses, and people trying to protect themselves after the score. That is how a money crime turns into something much darker. Armored car work became part of the case's atmosphere. Money routes, routine stops, and security patterns that could turn deadly when somebody decided the score was worth more than a life. We are not reenacting a killing here. We are showing the pressure around a job where cash moves on a schedule, and one violent decision can change 8 families forever. Violent cases rarely stay quiet by themselves. Somebody sees a car. Somebody hears a name. Somebody knows who had money right after the robbery. That is why witnesses matter. They turn rumors into timelines, and timelines into indictments. In Millsap's case, prosecutors argued that witnesses were not just inconvenient, they became targets. The part that makes this case different is the witness angle. Prosecutors were not only talking about violence during a robbery, they were talking about violence used afterward, like cleanup. Once witnesses become problems, the whole case changes. 8 people were dead. That is not a flex, and it is not a myth to hype up. It is the reason the sentence hit so hard. 8 families, 8 counts, 8 separate answers from a jury that decided Millsap crossed every line. For investigators, the challenge was connection. Separate scenes can look separate at first. Different dates, different witnesses, different city lines, different rumors. But detectives and prosecutors build cases by stacking details until the pattern is harder to ignore. Who benefited? Who was afraid? Who disappeared? And who kept showing up around the same violence? Kendrick Lute shows up in the public case summaries too, because a case this big does not move around one name by itself. There are co-defendants, statements, pressure, and people trying to survive the consequences. The jury had to sort through all of it. Before the verdict, the case was already messy. Press archives describe a 1999 fight where the Los Angeles County District Attorney was removed from the case over the appearance of a conflict. That is how much heat was sitting on this file before the jury even finished. That kind of fight matters because a death case has to survive everything. Bad procedure, weak evidence, conflicts, appeals, all of it. If one major piece breaks, the whole case can fall apart. Millsap still ended up with one of the heaviest outcomes possible. In January 2000, a Los Angeles County jury convicted Millsap of 8 first-degree murders with special circumstances, plus other charges. At that moment, the story stopped being allegation and became court history. Special circumstances are not just legal decoration. In California, that language is what opens the door to death. Multiple victims, robbery connections, witness killing allegations. Those details are what turn a murder case into a capital case. Then came the number that made the case travel online for years. 8 death sentences, one for each murder conviction. Even in a world full of wild true crime cases, 8 death sentences sounds unreal until you see it tied to the court record. After sentencing, the story moved into another system: death row, appeals, prison paperwork, and lawyers fighting over pieces of the case for years. The streets moved on, the families did not, the court file did not. Capital cases do not end when the judge reads the sentence. They keep breathing through appeals, habeas claims, resentencing questions, and legal deadlines. That is why a case from 2000 can still be moving decades later. A 2025 appellate summary shows the Millsap case was still alive procedurally. That is California death penalty reality. A man can get sentenced to death, sit for decades, and still have the courts reviewing the machinery around the sentence. On the street, a case becomes a name and a number. Online, it becomes a title. But the court file is colder than that. It asks who testified, what got proved, what the jury found, and why the punishment came down so heavy. When people believe testifying can get them killed, the whole system gets weaker. Communities stop talking, cases fall apart, violence protects itself. Prosecutors argued that fear was part of the machinery around Millsap. Prosecutors did not treat this as a routine robbery case. A sheriff's investigator on the case called Millsap and Loot, 2 of the most vicious offenders he had ever worked. Professionals who would not give an armored car guard a chance to hand over the money. Deputy District Attorneys Anthony Myers and Kevin McCormick prosecuted the case. Court accounts say Millsap later tried to solicit their murders from behind bars, a claim serious enough to become part of his own record. Millsap and Loot were not the only names in this case. Rashawn Colston faced 4 murder counts of his own, tried separately. Emmanuel Brown, a 4th man ordered to stand trial, died by suicide in jail before his case reached a jury. Public case summaries treat these as separate, unresolved threads, not settled facts about guilt, but part of how large this investigation actually was. At sentencing, Los Angeles Superior Court Judge J.D. Smith did not soften the moment. Coverage from the time quotes him saying he had been on the bench for decades and had never seen a case quite like this one. 8 death sentences, 1 judge, 1 courtroom, and a statement that stayed attached to the case for years. Millsap's name resurfaced in 2016, years into his appeal. A Los Angeles Unified School District teaching assistant named Terry Nichols was arrested at San Quentin, accused of smuggling heroin and 18 cell phones to him during a visit. She later pleaded guilty to a single count and served 6 months. It was not evidence in the murder case, but it was a real documented reminder that a death row file does not mean a case disappears from the news. To understand why this case moved the way it did, it helps to understand the era. Mid-1990s Los Angeles saw a documented surge in bank and armored car robberies, enough that reporting at the time called it the nation's bank robbery capital. More guns on the street after the 1992 unrest fed into a climate where robbery crews were, in press accounts, described as getting nastier and more violent. As of this reporting, Bruce Millsap's death sentence is not final. His case, docketed as People versus Millsap and Loot, remains on direct appeal before the California Supreme Court. A more recent bid for resentencing was denied specifically because that appeal is still pending. Capital cases in California can take decades to resolve, and this one, more than 25 years after sentencing, still has not. 8 death sentences is the hook, but it is not the whole story. The real story is what had to happen for a jury to answer one man with death 8 separate times. The Bruce Millsap case is what happens when robbery turns into identity, witnesses turn into threats, and violence becomes a way to manage consequences. It may start as a score. In court, it ended as 8 murder convictions, 8 death sentences, and a name stuck in the system for decades. 8 people lost their lives. This has been CrimeTown TV.